Hey, this is Catherine and Katie, and we're here to give you the 411K. Cheers!
In today's episode of the 411K, we spoke with Joe Rogers, founder and owner of Contagious Events. Joe has been honing his event management skills since the age of 5. Fast forward to today, and he has taken what was initially a night and weekend passion project and turned it into his own successful business. After nearly 11 years of working with couples and navigating the ins and outs of wedding planning, he has noticed some things about the wedding industry that aren't all flowers and lace, and he's determined to improve the experience for couples. Let's hear what Joe had to say about planning and paying for your big day. We are so excited to have Joe Rogers from Contagious Events with us today to talk about wedding planning. And Joe, we also need to mention, because I think this is a big thing, you're our first male expert that we have joining us on the show today.
Well, good.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to be the first.
So Joe, talk to us. Why is planning a wedding budget so hard?
You know, I actually think it's really funny that this is even a question, right? And it comes up a lot with couples who reach out and they kind of joke about like, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm doing and I need all the help in the world. To me, it's a little disheartening. So, you know, I do this for a living. I get married 20, 30 times a year, but the people who are reaching out and tell me that they have no idea what they're doing and they're completely lost and everything's really difficult. Well, yeah, it should be difficult. You likely have never done this before. Even for couples who may have done it before, they've probably only done it once. You know, there's not a lot of people out there who are planning, 4 weddings over the course of their lifetime. So first of all, it's hard because it's new and it's something that most people have never had to do before. But also, it's not just a logistical challenge. There's emotion in there. And so people seem to get passionate. And the other issue with wedding budgets is, if we're going to be completely frank, it's a lot of money. So it's very stressful. And because it's a lot of money, likely that you have multiple people who are contributing to your budget, which now means you have to manage multiple opinions and suggestions and different ideas. And there's going to be a lot of cooks in the kitchen that is wedding planning. So, things start to get stressful. And it's not all on the couple's plate. I mean, part of, I think, the challenge with the wedding industry and budget specifically, one of the things that drives me crazy, is just there's a lack of transparency in the wedding industry. We could do a whole separate podcast with multiple seasons about transparency in the wedding industry and what can we do to fix it. But anyone who has started the planning process has likely come across this, where they find a wedding vendor, the website looks great, the photos are great, but there is zero pricing information anywhere. Like I said, we can go back and forth on this. Part of the reason that vendors are not necessarily upfront about their pricing is that, truthfully, every wedding is unique. Every couple is different. And so it's really hard to just slap a price tag on a wedding service and call it a day. That's definitely part of it. But then the other part is that some vendors may feel like their pricing is a little intimidating and it might be off-putting. If I'm the first planner that a couple reaches out to and I tell them what my quotes are, they might think that I am just, like a luxury planner and that my prices are really, really expensive, and they may never come back to me. Whereas if I'm the 4th or the 5th planner that they reach out to, at this point, maybe they're used to seeing that price tag, and so they don't get the sticker shock. And so what happens here is that couples kind of go into wedding planning not really knowing how much they should be spending on their wedding. If we were to compare this to another stressful shopping experience, like buying a car, at the very least, when I'm shopping for a car, I know that I personally have zero business in the Range Rover dealership, because although I don't know the specific price, I do know the range, and I know that it's not going to happen in my budget, so I know to avoid that. But in the wedding world, it's not so obvious. And so it becomes stressful. Again, it's an emotional industry. So a lot of couples will look at a website and they'll fall in love with a vendor, or they'll fall in love with a concept. And then it's very disheartening if they find out, that the price is not within the number that they would think is imaginable.
I could not agree more. I recently got engaged and have been planning my own wedding. this is my first wedding and hopefully will be the only wedding that I plan. But I was shocked when my fiance and I finally sit down and we're like, okay, what sounds like a good number? It's like you're pulling a number out of a hat. You have no idea what that number is associated with. And then once you start actually asking for prices, you can kind of put like little dots together, but you're not seeing the same picture that someone who has done this 100 times, and it's very overwhelming.
Yes, it certainly can be. And I think, we definitely share in terms of, if I'm speaking for all wedding vendors, I think that we share some of the responsibility in that stress. And it's, definitely something that I would love to see shift in the industry. But then, the internet is just this black hole of wedding planning ideas. And unfortunately, there's two downsides to Pinterest that I say all the time. One, for my couples who tell me that they want to get married on a farm, I say, well, the problem with the internet is that it's not scratch and sniff, and farms smell like farms. The second problem with the internet, and we are seeing a little bit of a shift in this as well, but a lot of the popular wedding blogs, they don't publish the price tag. So when you're flipping through the popular blogs or even the magazines, you see these beautiful weddings, but they do not disclose what the total budget was. And like I said, we are starting to see a shift. There are a couple of blogs that I know of that actually are now publishing the overall budget, which I think is great, but it's definitely not happening mainstream yet.
I got married 8 years ago, and similar to Katie, I knew nothing about what I could expect it to cost. All I knew is that I had to keep it cheap, but that's almost antithetical to budgeting, right? It's more just how low can I get the price to be versus setting a budget and sticking to it. So going over is really easy because you're just researching like, well, so what does a venue cost? How much is a dress? How much are flowers? How much is catering, right? These are things that you kind of can't go without if you're expecting to have some sort of traditional ceremony, wedding, reception format. I felt like I used the knot a lot at the time. And I was really disheartened with it because I felt like they were just similar to Pinterest, showing me a bunch of things that I couldn't afford. What do you think that site does to help couples or hurt them? And what are the sites that do help couples?
That in general, the wedding industry is rightfully so facing a lot of criticism. One would be, for setting false expectations. And it's sad, but a lot of these magazines and, the blogs that you look at, some of these weddings aren't even real weddings. They're editorial shoots where wedding vendors get together. They hire models. So these are drop dead gorgeous people. They're not everyday people. And everything you see is just very unrealistic because it's not a wedding. It's an editorial shoot to showcase, a designer's abilities or to showcase, a rental company's new line of products. So I do encourage everyone when they're looking at, whether it's a blog or a magazine, if it's related to the wedding world, use them as a really great resource for inspiration, collect those images. But I would caution anyone from using them for what we would call the copy paste design, right? So don't take those pictures to your floral designer and say, I want this exact centerpiece. You want your wedding to be unique. You want it to be, personal for the two of you. We want your guests at your wedding to walk into your reception and say, oh my God, this is so them. All of these publications are really, really great for offering inspiration and sometimes offering unique ways to change up the wedding. I don't think that the blogs and the magazines out there are terrible. I would be upset if someone ripped a page out of the knot and came to me and said, this is the reception that I want, because I want all of my clients' receptions to be unique and personal to them. I don't care if you're spending $5 million or if you're spending $500. There's a way that we can make your wedding beautiful and meaningful. And so it's just about kind of creativity. But use those blogs, use the magazines for inspiration and, to kind of get an idea for what you like and what you don't like. A lot of times we have couples who will send me, their Pinterest board, and I'll immediately say, okay, it looks like we really like peonies. And the bride will look at me and say, I have no idea what a peony is. But in all of her pictures, that's the flower that she has, the common thread in all of her images. And so we're able to kind of identify the couple's wedding style just based on the pictures that they gravitate towards.
That's actually so funny. I just had a conversation with a florist who educated me on what a hydrangea was.
Yep.
Didn't know what that was. So apparently I really like hydrangeas. So there you go.
I really like peonies, but my husband doesn't
So
like the
there you
price tag. So I always end up with tulips.
Yeah.
Joe, I can only imagine what you have seen in this industry. I can only imagine the stories that you must tell after a couple drinks at a bar about your work week. What are some examples that you might be able to share, sort of lessons learned, people just not being on the same page? How do you help those couples also navigate those situations?
A few things here. One is for any couple who is starting the wedding planning journey, I think the number one thing that everyone who sits at the table needs to accept is that anybody in Massachusetts can get married over the course of 3 days, because we do have a 3-day waiting period here. But after 3 days, you can get married for $50, and that's all it takes. Everything else beyond that is extra. The flowers are extra, the reception is extra, and everything else is optional. The important thing about a wedding is that piece of paper, that marriage certificate, that is kind of the commitment or the contract in writing that you're committing to each other. But everything else is extra. And so once, we can convey that message and you accept it, you almost feel the pressure just roll off your shoulders, right? Because you don't have to do anything else. You do have to go to city or town hall and apply for a marriage license. And you do have to have a wedding ceremony of some kind, but everything else is optional. And at the end of the day, no matter what you pick or don't pick, it's still a wedding. The second piece is there are parents or grandparents who envision something that might be a little bit more of a traditional wedding versus, the couple who wants to have kind of something in a different setting or a more unique setting. And I think, what's important to understand about this is that wedding design and weddings in general, there's definitely a shift in the market. The history of weddings and wedding ceremonies, it's very sexist. Brides were property. It was a transaction. It wasn't even about love when weddings first started. And so a lot of these traditions that we have are actually rooted in just the most insane things in the world. And so, when we start explaining these traditions to mom and dad about, like the reason we have bridesmaids is because the evil spirits need to be confused and not know who the bride is. All of a sudden, the important things start to come back to the surface. And what's important is that we have a day that's meaningful and important and celebrates the love of two people.
But what would you say the average budget is? And is that supposed to be a good marker for how to start having that conversation with your fiance?
You probably can't hear my eyes roll, but anytime someone comes to me and starts talking about average wedding budget, it's just absolutely mind-boggling to me, because there is no such thing as an average wedding budget. And that's simply, again, because every wedding is different and everyone's definition of what a wedding is or what a wedding budget is different. So we have couples who will come to us and say, I'm not including XYZ in my budget, but then, the next couple we talk to will include those things. It's really, really difficult to come up with an average wedding budget. And I know that that's like super not helpful when I'm sitting here and telling people, look, like you shouldn't know how much a wedding costs because you've never done this before. But then to also say, but I also can't tell you what the average cost is, so I can't help you prepare. And that's, I know that sounds crazy, which is why about 2 years ago, we set out and built an online budget calculator so that we could help people determine how much they should plan to put aside for their ideal wedding. If I'm going to reiterate, the reason we don't have an average wedding budget is because there's no such thing as an average wedding. And so when we put this calculator together, what we wanted to do was ask couples, what does your wedding look like to you? What kind of vendors are you hiring? How many people are in your wedding party? Are you going to bring in, fancy lighting, maybe chandeliers? Who is marrying you? Is it a member of clergy? Is it a friend? Is it, a celebrant or an officiant, a JP? And so what our calculator does is it walks you through kind of like the process of building your wedding team, your wedding vendors. And it does a pretty good job of getting a very basic understanding of just the overall vision of the wedding. And then it'll work backwards. And so it starts applying local fees. So our calculator is based for Boston, where we're based out of. And so it'll it'll start taking what we see to be average costs for each of those elements that you're telling the calculator, and it'll come out with some kind of a figure. And so it will let you know if your total budget is $50,000, but you're inviting 200 people, you're going to fall short in some of these areas. And here are the vendor categories where maybe we need to get creative about how we're spending the money. We built the budget calculator because I felt terrible telling people, I don't know what the average cost is because every wedding is unique, but I also don't expect you to have any idea of what to pay for the wedding. So our goal with the calculator was to help couples go into the planning process at least knowing that they can plan a wedding on the budget that they have, regardless of what the number is, but maybe we're not hiring every possible vendor under the sun just in the interest of sticking to whatever that wedding budget number is.
It was actually super helpful to even start having a conversation about what our vision was, because I think we were literally Google searching, like, what goes into a wedding? What are the items that we're going to forget? Because obviously you can budget for, venue and a dress and a tux, but there were so many things that you even said that I didn't even think would be a cost or that I would have to think about, like how many bridesmaids, like what is the wedding party going to be? That I didn't even really think of that as being a large expense if you have a large party, but obviously makes sense.
I remember when we were planning our wedding, that was one thing that I knew I could keep the cost down on, because by keeping a smaller bridal party, I also knew I could get my bridesmaids a really nice gift. For the rehearsal dinner, I could invite their spouses and partners and, whoever else they wanted to have there. And it did feel a little bit more intimate as well.
Exactly. And it's really great for, again, those couples who come into it and they don't know, right? So our goal with the calculator is also for the couples who haven't gotten that far and don't know how many people are in their wedding party. Then we're able to show them, okay, well, if you have a small wedding party, this is where we can allocate your funds, versus if you're having a large wedding party, this is what it's going to look like. And so sometimes the calculator can actually help our clients make decisions along the process from the start, so that they're kind of going into it a little bit more educated than, a couple that might be going into it blind.
What are maybe other ways to approach devising and drawing up a wedding budget?
So percentage-based is definitely the most popular approach. A lot of wedding pros out there will assign percentage-based. The percentage-based budget assumes that you already have a big number that you're comfortable spending on your wedding. How much funds do we have available for the wedding? And so then what we do is we would assign percentages to that overall number. So for example, they say that couples should expect to spend about 10% of their wedding budget on a planner. So you kind of create these neat little buckets of how much money you can afford to spend in different categories. Another way that couples build their wedding budget is what I call contribution based. And that's essentially just determining, who's covering what aspect of the wedding. So sometimes there's a grandmother or an aunt or someone who wants to purchase the wedding dress as a gift. And so we start, figuring out who's contributing to the wedding and in what factor. And then we're able to build a budget just based on those things. So if grandma is buying the wedding dress, it's very important to have a conversation with her about, where she would like to be in terms of what is she prepared to spend on a wedding dress. The bride's idea of budget and the grandmother's idea may be very different. And I know that it's awkward to talk to family about how much money are you going to give me for this gift that you've offered me, but it will be a lot more awkward if you pick a very expensive dress and all of a sudden grandma isn't paying for the entire dress. So it's good to go into these things when you're doing contribution based with a mutual understanding of what the expectations are. What are the boundaries there? Are they just forking over the money and giving the couple full, complete creative control over what they're doing? Or do mom and dad expect to have, a say in the menu or in the service style because they're paying for it? And so these are very important conversations to have from the beginning so that you don't run into these awkward and potentially dramatic family situations in the middle of planning. And then the third way that is actually how I would advise every couple to look at planning their wedding is what I call priority based. And so with priority based planning, what I do with my couples is I sit them down and I say, okay, how much money is in the wedding savings account? What's the number that we're comfortable spending? And then I ask them to sit down and independently make a list of what are the most important things about your wedding. Give me three. So when you close your eyes and you envision your wedding, what are the three things that you consistently always envision? Sometimes it's tall centerpieces. Sometimes people write down live music or a packed dance floor. And so what we're doing is we're creating a short list of what matters, those priority-based planning elements. If a couple really cares about having a live band and a really great photographer, why wouldn't we spend a little bit more and splurge on those two things if that's what's really important to them, and we can figure out a way to pull off all the other stuff while still staying within budget? There's no reason that we can't go above what the typical percentage would be for those categories if that's what's important to the couple and they understand that we're maybe paring back in other areas so that we can give them a really great live band or an amazing photographer with great albums for them to look at years after the wedding. And when everything's done and over with, what are the things that they're going to be really glad that they spent the money on, and what are the things that maybe they're going to look back on and say, geez, it was kind of silly that we spent so much money on these crazy guest favors.
I remember when I was planning my wedding, I did narrow it down to, what are the most important elements. And I remember picking food, bar, photos. And so we just took that money that we might have put in a wedding videographer and threw it into one of those top three priority areas by spending a little bit more on the photographer and having an amazing caterer.
Exactly. And for every couple, it's going to be different.
Can you tell us your most expensive client wedding budget and your least expensive client wedding budget?
I can tell you our least expensive client budget was more of an elopement style wedding, and actually a wedding that my team and I still talk about to this day. It was last year on Marathon Monday. We had a couple that actually both of them ran in the Boston Marathon. And then once they finished, they got married at Arlington Street Church in front of the bride's parents and had a small reception in South Boston after. Super small, super meaningful, and just, a really amazing experience. And I think that this is a great testament to it really doesn't matter how much money you spend on your wedding as long as what you're doing is meaningful. We don't disclose budgets specifically, but in general terms, I can tell you the lowest budget wedding that we've planned is definitely less than $1,000. The highest budget wedding that we've planned, we certainly have exceeded $1 million for a wedding before, which, again, I know for a lot of us that just sounds like an astronomical amount.
Do you think that there is a trend in couples now more paying for their own wedding versus getting contributions from their family or having their family front the bill entirely?
Again, I think that there is a shift for sure. We definitely are seeing couples, contributing, or we're seeing both sides of the family contributing. The concept of the bride's family paying for the wedding completely. Think about where that tradition came from. It has no business being in 2019. It's not completely phased out, but we definitely do see couples who are building their wedding budget from multiple sources.
It was something that meant a lot to me to be able to pay for my own wedding, or at least a majority of it. My sisters and I watched numerous Say Yes to the Dress episodes in our years growing up. It's funny because watching shows like that, seeing people spend, $10,000 on a wedding dress or something like that, I was struggling with how much am I supposed to be saving? I'm in my 20s. I want to be, traveling and going out and having fun with my friends. But if having a wedding and paying for it yourself is something that's meaningful for you, where do you even begin?
I think that the industry is changing, it's evolving, and the definition of weddings are changing. The definition of wedding and the visual expectation is also changing. A wedding can be something that happens in a place of religion with a reception and dinner and dancing in a hall immediately after, but it can also be a small group of 20 people in a private dining room at a restaurant downtown, or it can be brunch under a tent in your parents' backyard. It doesn't have to be what, we've all grown up seeing on TV. And so that's cool because we can start, making weddings look exactly how we want them to look and exactly how we can afford them to be.
What are the top wedding myths? What do I need to steer clear of?
Oh gosh, there are so many, but things that immediately come to mind. There is a strong held belief out there that as soon as you tell someone that it's for a wedding, all of a sudden the price tag magically jumps up and increases. There is some truth to the fact that things for weddings cost more than things for other events. And that's simply because with weddings, there's a lot more emphasis. So I always use the experience of going prom dress shopping. So when you were in high school, you likely went and bought a prom dress. You went to Macy's, you picked something off the rack, you walked out, maybe you got it hemmed professionally, maybe your grandmother or your aunt or someone in your family tailored it for you, and it was a one-time thing, and then that was it and you were done, right? So that white prom dress was significantly cheaper than the wedding dress that you're going to wear on your wedding day, but that's because your wedding gown has more elements to it. Let's not forget that for the course of 6 to 8 weeks, you have to keep going back to the dress shop and having it completely tailor fit to your body. So the experience is a lot different. So yes, it is true that things for weddings do cost more, but it doesn't cost more because it's a wedding. The other one is that I get all the time is that couples will tell me they want to get married in June because this flower is in season and it's the cheapest time to do it because it's within season. Again, there's some truth there. There are some flowers like peonies, for example, that have kind of a limited window of availability. And so they are cheaper when they're in season. But then there are other blooms, they're grown intentionally near the equator and then they're shipped out all year long. So one example is sunflowers. You can have sunflowers at your wedding at any point in the year because they're always available. Another myth would be backyard weddings. Everyone thinks backyard weddings are cheaper. 99% of the time, this is not true. Backyard weddings seem cheaper to couples at first because the venue is quote unquote free, right? You don't have to pay anything to have an event in your backyard, but you do have to transform your backyard into a wedding venue. So in New England, you are likely going to need a tent in case it rains. You need tables, chairs, linens, unless you live in, a very large home. Likely your property was not designed to host 150 people at once. Then we're talking about how you're going to have to bring in maybe restroom trailers, or now we have to rent a field kitchen for your caterer to be able to prepare dinner for 150 people in your backyard. And all of these things, they all add up. Those, I think, are kind of like the three big myths that we repeat over and over.
Let's talk gifts and registries and how they're evolving.
I guess the process of wedding registries and what they look like is also evolving with the industry. So a lot of couples today, they're living together throughout their engagement. Before the wedding happens, they likely have already built a home together. A lot of younger couples don't necessarily put priority in having a display case of china that they will pull out a couple times a year. They seem to be a little bit more practical with the things that they want and need in their registry. And like I said, many times they already have those things. So I think what we're seeing now is that the concept of a registry is shifting a little bit. There are registry services out there where couples can ask for what's called a honey fund, which is essentially a buttoned up way of asking people to give money towards a large expense. Maybe it's purchasing a home or paying for a honeymoon. We have also seen couples add experiences to their registry. So things like you're going to Hawaii for your honeymoon, you can ask your guests to buy certain elements of your honeymoons. But we're also seeing what we would consider non-traditional registries pop up. So I think one that just flew on my radar this month is REI, which is, kind of like the outdoor store for camping gear and hiking and for couples who are a little bit more adventurous. They have a wedding registry. Couples can go into the store and create a registry for their guests to buy them tents and sleeping bags and camping gear. So we're seeing more and more retail outlets kind of getting into the registry market. Be strategic about who you are registering with. So I tell all of my couples at a minimum, you want to have one kind of online registry, but then you should still have one that's a brick and mortar store. But also be aware that most of these retail outlets, after your wedding is over, they will send you a coupon, and it could be anywhere for 10 to 20% off of anything that's on your registry that wasn't purchased. If you just bought a home together and you really need a new refrigerator, go ahead and start a wedding registry at Lowe's. You don't even have to tell your wedding guests about it if you know for sure that nobody's going to buy you a refrigerator for your wedding. But what will happen is that after the wedding is over, Lowe's might send you a coupon for 10 to 20% off of the refrigerator. So if it's a big purchase that you've kind of had your eyes on, but it's a long-term thing that maybe you're saving up for, or that you know you won't be purchasing until after the wedding, why not stick it on your registry and just get that coupon? I would say almost all of our couples that come to us, they always express a little bit of discomfort in creating, like going back to your childhood when you're creating a wish list. And, I think that a lot of couples feel awkward kind of creating a list of things that they want people to buy for them. Flip side to this is that you could not do a registry and just end up with a whole bunch of stuff that you didn't want anyway, because people are going to buy you gifts whether you create a registry or not. So you might as well give them some guidelines so that at least you're getting stuff that you do want.
Thank you so much for coming on tonight. We are so happy to have you, and we are so thrilled to learn all of these tips and tricks on planning a wedding budget. So this is going to be super helpful for me specifically, but I'm also sure that our listeners will really appreciate it as well.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to the 411K. Tune in for more podcasts and follow us on Instagram at _411K. Cheers!